Hi, all my fabulous friends. Welcome to Fabulous Nuts ASMR. My name is Paige, and tonight I have a new storybook. I am so excited. It is called Daddy's Daddy's Bedtime Fairy Stories. And it was written by Mary Graham Boner in 1916. Is that better or worse? Let me adjust this just a tad. Is that better, or you can watch the green? So I figured I'd give everybody just a second to come on in. I always have to turn this chat on to everybody can be shown. So we'll take care of all of our business right now. The book I'm reading tonight is in the public domain. I hope you enjoy these stories. They are all about fairies. I'm so excited. I brought my little fairy lights with me. So you gotta have your fairy lights, and I have some more behind me. So we'll just give everybody a second to come on over. When you come in, if you'd ring that doorbell and give me a nice thumbs up, I sure would appreciate it. And once again, what we're going to do is between the stories, between the stories, we'll stop and chat and see who's around and say hey to everybody. So I'll go through the story and then we'll come in and check and see what's happening. How does that sound with everyone? All right. Are you ready? I'm so excited. We have a few more minutes. We do. Let me know. Can you hear me whispering? All right.
Every time I
Oh,
open that
hold on.
my soul left my body. I had that too.
My spreadsheet is spreadsheeting. All right, guys. I just wanted to be sure I could see the chat during talk time. Thank you, everybody, for being here with me. You could be anywhere and you're choosing to be here. So I really, really, really appreciate it. The first story we are going to read is called The Beautiful Little Dawn Fairy. I wonder if you know, children, that there are certain lovely little fairies living around us all the time who call themselves the Dawn Fairies. Hi, Hannah. Welcome in. No, said Evelyn. I have never heard of them. Do tell us about them and why they call themselves such a funny name. Hi, Joe. Well, continued Daddy, it does seem a funny name when you first hear it, but when I tell you why, you will understand. You see, the chief object of a fairy is never to be seen by human. These fairies are around us all the time, but we do not know it. We cannot see them. The only time they play without any worries or fear is in the early morning before the dawn breaks. And so they call themselves the Dawn Fairies. Their dresses are all made of dull gray, which looks like the early morning. And then it is that they frisk about and have the most wonderful time. As soon as the sun rises, their dresses change color and are very dazzling, just like the sun, which you know is so bright that you cannot possibly look at it. You see, when the sun rises and the day begins, all the humans commence to get up and go about. And as the fairies do not wish to be seen, the queen of the fairies has given them all these very, very bright frocks, so none of them can be seen. I know a way of seeing the dawn fairies, suggested Jack. Oh, what? Said Evelyn excitedly. Why, we just get up early, you silly thing, said Jack, and watch them play in their own dawn dresses before they put on the very, very bright dresses the fairy queen has given them. Jack, began Daddy, your idea has already been thought of by the fairy queen. For should any little boy or girl get up before daybreak in order to see the dawn fairies, the queen, who is always watching over them, waves her magic wand, and the fairies are instantly turned to mist. Once a little boy like you, Jack, had heard of the dawn fairies and was so eager to see them that he got up long before daybreak. In fact, before the fairies themselves were up, for they slept when it was really dark. This little boy hid in the trunk of a tree. After what seemed like a long time to him, the lovely gray dawn fairies came out from their own sleeping places, and he heard them laughing their low, belly-like laughs. Suddenly, one of them realized that someone was around and caught sight of the little boy. Oh dear, shrieked the fairies. There's a huge person near us. At which all the fairies scattered. So far from that day, the queen has been careful that no one else should see the dawn fairies. Welcome in. Hey, Snowball. Welcome to Fabulous Nuts ASMR. Everybody, say hey to Snowball. He is my new best friend. So he came for a fairy story, because what's go better with nuts than fairies, right? All right, here we go. I hope everybody is having a great evening. We're on the next story, Mr. Sandman and the Playful Fairies. It was 7 o'clock, and Jack and Evelyn were in their two little white beds, for they were very sleepy, for they had been playing hard all day. But they wouldn't admit it to their daddy, because they were afraid he wouldn't tell them his usual bedtime story. Of course, they occasionally did fall asleep before the end of story time, but then that was on accident. Daddy saw without being told how sleepy they were, so he decided to tell them the story of old Mr. Sandman, who lives forever and who sees every night that all the little children in the world rub their eyes and crawl into their snug, comfy beds. So Daddy began. Once upon a time, the queen of the fairies was getting ready for a very fine ball, probably a ball that Snowball would throw. She told all the little fairies they must go to bed as soon as she left them, for even the little fairies have to sleep too. But the little fairies were very wide awake and also feeling very naughty. And they thought it would be such fun to play for hours and hours, for the queen would not be home again until midnight. So they began to plan the game they would play first. Maybe they planned throw the snowball. Let's find out. They decided on hide and seek. Okay, as it would be such an especially wide awake game. They romped and they raced about, hiding in this flower and that, stealing under the leaves, dodging behind the trunks of the tree, and playing such jolly pranks that old Mr. Owl, who was roosting in the branches of an oak, laughed right out loud. Did you ever hear an owl laugh? Well, it is a very unusual sort of laugh, and the fairies had to stop their game and laugh at Mr. Owl's laugh. But Mr. Sandman never goes to balls or parties of any kind, for he knows how hard the children have been playing all day and how much they need their cozy beds at night. He had just started his nightly rounds to see all his little friends were going quickly into the land of sweet dreams when he spied the little fairies playing on the mossy grass in the moonlight. He said to himself, here is some work for me to do. And without being seen, he waved in the air his magic nightcap, and one by one the little fairies yawned and rubbed their sleepy eyes, and the game became quieter and quieter. Finally, one brave fairy, for it is very brave to admit you're sleepy, said, I must go lie down on this bed of moss. I am so sleepy. Soon all the little fairies followed suit and dropped off into the land of Nod to dream of the other fairies that lived all in the countless stars. When Mr. Sandman saw them all sleeping soundly, he winked his right eye. Like that. Hey, darling, which meant he felt very pleased with himself. Welcome in, Derek. Thank you. Now I must see that some more of the little tots have pleasant dreams. And sure enough, Daddy looked and saw Jack and Evelyn had fallen asleep. Welcome in. Thanks for being here, Snowball. All right. The next chapter. This one is for Derek. All right, Derek, are you ready? The Invisible Fairy and the Tree of Plenty, which is guarded by Derek. Did you ever hear, said Daddy, the story of the fairy and the Tree of Plenty that was guarded by Derek? No, said Jack and Evelyn. Do tell us that story. Once upon a time, commenced Daddy, there were two little children, a little boy and a little girl, just like you. They had an Uncle Derek who lived in India. And one day a message came and he was expected home next week. Of course they knew the uncle must be wonderful, as how could anyone living in India help but be wonderful? To celebrate my return, the Uncle Derek told them, we must have a picnic this afternoon. And of course, the children were delighted and could hardly wait for the afternoon to come. The uncle was away all morning and was full of mysteries when he returned for luncheon. In the afternoon, the two children, with a lot of their little friends, followed Uncle Derek to the place in the woods where the picnic was to be held. To their great surprise and sorrow, they could not see any signs of a party. Welcome in, Sadie. Their uncle saw their surprised faces and their disappointed manners and said, I am not really given this party. It's to be given by a very kind and good fairy. Hello, Edward. Welcome in. I'll use you in the next story, okay? It's to be given. That is her home over there in the tree, which is called the Tree of Plenty. She is very shy, so you won't be able to see her because she hears voices. She disappears within the tree, and no one can find her. When I came here this morning, I had to talk down into the trunk of the tree, but she promised to have all kinds of sugar plums and goodies ready for you this afternoon. And she always keeps her word. I am sure you will find them there between those low branches. Sure enough, there were all sorts of good things: ice cream, nuts, candy, and bonbons. The children gathered eagerly around while the goodies from the tree were handed out to them. Then they sat down on a log to eat. Thank you. They wished that the fairy would join them on their feast, but they did not see her. Perhaps she's asleep, one of the children suggested. You know that the fairies dance by the light of the moon. They must be tired and ready to go to bed by daylight. As they were eating, these dainty numbers, little rabbits, squirrels, and birds came hovering around, but they were so small. The children seemed so big to them, they were afraid to go too near. After the children had finished eating and had made Uncle Derek tell them of plenty of the fairy stories, they started for home. And then the uncle said to the rabbits, squirrels, and birds would finish all the goodies, as the fairies always saw to it that they too had a picnic under the Tree of Plenty. All right, Edward. Thank you for coming. I'm going to add you in this story, so listen closely. Thank you all for coming in. Be sure you are hitting those thumbs up. I appreciate it. And I saw Sadie join us. Welcome, Sadie. All right, the next story. I hope you can hear me well enough. The Jolly Snow King Edward's First Party. Once upon a time, began Daddy, there had been a great snowstorm during the night, and everything in the woods was heavy with snow. The branches of the big pine trees looked as if they would break with the huge packs of snow on them, and all the little bushes looked like fairyland with snow covering them. To be sure, it was the blessings to you, Sadie. It was a fairyland, for early in the morning, all the fairies gathered together in their favorite part of the woods near the running brook, which they used to call their playground and which they called Brookwood. But this time the brook had half frozen. Lovely icicles hung from the snows in the brook. Over some parts of it were thin sheets of ice. "Oh, isn't it marvelous?" cried the Fairy Queen. "We'll have a dance," cried the Queen of the Fairies. "Little elves, little brownies, all of you come," she shouted. Soon they all came, being carried by chariots of snow with the north wind as their steed. "Oh, oh," cried them. They all cried. Cried they all, but that feels weird. "How wonderful! Did you do this beautiful work with your magic wand, lovely Queen of the Fairies?" "No, I must admit that the old Snow King Edward has made a lovelier scene than even my magic could." "Where does the old King Edward live?" asked one of the brownies. "Why, he lives up in the snow cloud," said the Fairy Queen. Let's ask him to dance, suggested one of the brownies. That's a splendid idea, said the Fairy Queen. So she waved her magic wand and called in her clear, lovely voice, "Come to the dance, Snow King Edward. Come to the dance." The Snow King needed no further urging, for flakes of snow began to fly about the air, and soon a jolly person who looked like a great big snowball. Oh, shoot, snowball, I should have said you. Great big snowball at first glance jumped down onto the ground. "Here I am," said Edward, "and thank you so much, little fairies, elves, and brownies. You too, beautiful Fairy Queen, for inviting me to the party. Though I arrange many a party, I have never been asked to one before, and I am certainly pleased." And as he said this, he made a low bow to the Fairy Queen. In doing so, he fell over, for he was a little round. How they all did laugh, and he laughed too, for he said he loved a merry party. I will give you lots more parties if you think they're so beautiful, and we'll ask you to come to them all, they shouted. "That's fine. We'll have one tomorrow, and oh, so many more. I'll come to them all. Hooray, hooray." So that was the next story. All right. Let me check what is being held. All right. Let's see what we got going. Are we ready for the next one? Sadie, I'm going to use you this time, okay? The Fairy Queen Sadie's New Year's Visit. Here we go. Once upon a time, commenced Daddy, a grand ball was given on New Year's Eve by all the elves and brownies. It was held in a beautiful park, which was lightened with Japanese lanterns. And there were a number of little flower booths in the corners of the park where the elves and the brownies could drink pink lemonade when they felt hot or thirsty from dancing. We'll have to see. The elves were far prettier dancers than the brownies, for they were graceful and dainty, and the way they could twirl on their toes and spin and fill the brownies with envy. The brownies looked very cunning in their little brown suit and quaint brown hats, but they were much too round to be good dancers. Often they would topple over and dance, and how the elves would laugh, and how mad it made the brownies feel. Towards the latter part of the evening, they all forgot all envious feelings and joined together in doing square dances and the Virginia reel. When they were almost ready to drop from dancing so much and playing so hard, they had decided it was about time to stop. So they all sat down on the grass for the most marvelous supper you could ever possibly imagine. First, they had broiled gillibird tongues on toast, and some fried ants with mushroom sauce, and a delicious snail salad for dessert, pink ice cream to match the pink lemonade, for they voted on pink as their favorite color. Mine too. Of course, they had nuts and raisins and bonbons of all colors to pull with each other, and the bonbons were all sorts of little toys, whistles, paper caps, mottos, wooden soldiers, and toy animals. Suddenly, the most beautiful fairy appeared. dressed in all white with a silver crown on her head, a silver wand, and a silver star glittering on her dress. The Queen of the Fairies, they all said breathlessly. And at this moment, at the far distance, they heard the sound of jingle bells in a happy new year. Happy New Year to all the elves and the brownies, said Queen Sadie. Happy New Year, beautiful fairy, they all said in reply. The fairy Queen Sadie waved her wand, and in the loveliest, most musical voice, she said, I wish you all good luck. At which she vanished, and in the lap of each little elf and brownie lay a glittering, round, gold piece of good luck from the Fairy Queen engraved on it. Never had the elves and brownies had such a marvelous surprise and a visit from the Fairy Queen Sadie. I've actually seen her. Oh, it was wonderful. And they knew how lucky they were. For if the Fairy Queen wished them luck, it would be sure to follow them all their lives. And you may be sure all the little elves and brownies were the happiest creatures in existence as they crawled into their flowery beds very, very early that New Year's morning. All right, we're starting a new story. Who should I use? Who wants? All right, Snowball, you commented last, so you get another story. Excuse me, I gotta get a sip. I love it, Snowball. I miss reading at night to my kids. All right, and here I got the fairy light just for us. All right, Snowball's turn. He gets to be Snowball's coasting party with the goblins. How appropriate. There was once, said Daddy, a little boy named Snowball who had always had an awful horror of goblins. His mother and Daddy would tell him that goblins were very much like brownies and that they were always playing amongst themselves. They told him that goblins were jolly and good-natured and would never dream of frightening him or any other little boy or girl. But still, for some strange reason, Snowball was very much afraid of even the name goblin. His daddy told him a story every night at bedtime, but after the lights were out, he would begin to think of the goblins and would imagine every creak in the room must mean something. One night, after Snowball's daddy had told him a story and the lights were out, Snowball lay for a few moments wide awake. But he'd been playing hard all day, so it was not long before he fell asleep. In his sleep, a funny-looking goblin came to him and tapped him on the shoulder. It was his first time Snowball had ever seen a goblin. But strangely enough, he wasn't scared. Hello, Snowball, said the goblin. I'm glad to see you're not afraid of me. I knew you wouldn't be after you really seen me. Often people imagine we're dreadful creatures, and you see we're not at all. We like to have plenty of fun, and we would never hurt anyone for anything in the world. That doesn't sound awful, does it? No, said Snowball. I think you're just as nice as you can be. I can't imagine how I would ever have been frightened. Well, Snowball, as long as you're not frightened at me anymore, how would you like to go on a coasting party we goblins are giving tonight? So Snowball got up and put on his warmest coasting clothes and put on a woolly red cap way down over his ears, and off he started with the goblin. And when they got outside, they walked to a nearby hill where there were quantities of goblins with their sleds. They were tossing the light fallen snow into each other's faces and laughing and having such a good time. I brought Snowball along, said Snowball's goblin, and he says he's not afraid of us anymore. Hooray for Snowball, cried all the goblins. Snowball did have the best time coasting, and he thought all the goblins were perfectly wonderful. They were all delighted that he was no longer afraid of them, and that he enjoyed the snowstorm just as much as they did. But even a snowstorm party with the goblins has to come to an end. For Snowball heard his mother saying, "Time to get up, Snowball, and you can take your sled to school with you, for it has been snowing all night." And Snowball realized it was all a dream. But he was never afraid of goblins again. All right. This one's for Patrick. I see Patrick in the chat. How the fairies rescued Gray Squirrel Patrick. It was half snowing, half raining, and the fairies were hoping it would get just a little colder, said Daddy. Then it would freeze, and the snowy rain would stick to the trees and make the most beautiful crystal icicles, and they could play castle games. What was that? Asked Evelyn. Wherever there are icicles, continued Daddy, or pretty ice shapes, the queen of the fairies would call the other fairies and say, "Let's play castle games." Then the fairies would come from all around and get their places for the castle game, get in their place. The queen of the fairies would pretend that she was having the castle taken from her. They made believe that the icicles were turrets and towers, back of which it was a huge wandering castle in which the prisoners were held captive. The queen of the fairies would pretend that she was the new queen of the land whose subjects had been badly treated, and she would begin her reign with no prisoners. So all the fairies who were her followers helped to destroy all the turrets and the towers of icicles. So then the castle could come down and the prisoners could get away without being seen. Well, they got plenty of snowballs ready first and hit the icicles with the snowballs, the biggest and the strongest icicles, which wouldn't come down with just the snowballs. They would pull down, and oh, such fun and laughter as they always do have over this game. The day I'm telling you about, it did freeze, and they commenced their game of pulling down the castle. The playground they chose was in a quarry, and there were plenty of icicles attached to the rocks. But behind an icicle, what do you suppose they found? A little gray squirrel named Patrick. They had jumped off a rocky cliff where he had seen some nuts stowed away. After eating some of the nuts, he eventually fell so tired and sleepy that he had fallen asleep, for he was a very young squirrel. And as he slept, it had grown suddenly very much colder, and the icicle by the rock on which he had grown so thick he couldn't pass it. So when the icicle was hit by a snowball and still didn't fall down, one of the fairies went up to pull it down. You know, fairies have a great deal of strength. even though they are dainty and light. You can imagine the joy of the fairies when they found their imaginary game had really come true and that they had rescued the little squirrel Patrick. Hello, Tamar's Kitchen. Welcome in. The squirrel was very cold, but he kept somewhat warm sleeping, and he soon revived by jumping around. He was so grateful for the fairies for saving his life that he invited them to the squirrel's next nut party. All right, Tamar, we are reading Daddy's, what are we reading? Daddy's Bedtime Fairy Tales, and whoever pops in last gets their name, or has the last comment, gets their name used in the next story. So Tamar's Kitchen will be used in this story, okay? Here we go. How the jolly brownie, Tamar's Kitchen, enjoyed the slush. Most people don't think a day when it is half raining, half snowing is nice. But I can tell you that the brownies did. And even, or said Daddy to Jack and Evelyn, it was the evening, and all day they've been struggling in different little hiding places, bobbing up and down with excitement as they watched the hot sun melt the snow. They ran behind trees as they traveled to the village near their woods, just so they could see people looking annoyed in the slush. And when they heard someone say, "What horrible weather we're having. I do dislike March so the little brownies of Tamar's Kitchen would almost chuckle out loud. They certainly grinned from ear to ear. The brownies of Tamar's Kitchen thought people were very ridiculous when they grumbled about the weather. So they waited with glee until the evening came. Then they had a party. The brownies of Tamar's Kitchen divided themselves into two sides for the evening. Each side was given a separate part of the woods in which to get something original. 6 judges were chosen. The brownies of Tamar's Kitchen, which had the best exhibits, were to sit still during supper and be waited on by the others. They were to get all the goodies first. So each side worked very hard to make their exhibit win. One side was called the round brownies of Tamar's Kitchen, and the other side were called the rectangle brownies of Tamar's Kitchen. The exhibit from the round brownies was a snow house, which of course was beautifully made because the snow was wet and stuck together very well. But the rectangle brownies of Tamar's Kitchen had made a fine park. They had made paths and smoothed off the snow edges and the paths with flower beds. In the flower beds, they'd stuck twigs and little branches. On these, they had put snowballs, which too had stuck because of the wet snow. Really, their park looked very funny, but all the brownies of Tamar's Kitchen all thought it was perfect, and the round judges agreed with the judges when they said that the rectangle brownies of Tamar's Kitchen had the most original and interesting exhibit. They all sat down on the little snowy stumps of trees while the round brownies waited on them. They had brownie soup, which is perfectly delicious. And of course, it was piping hot. They called it brownie soup because it is brown. Then they had croquettes, which with brown gravy and brown potatoes. And for dessert, they had brown Betty pudding. The judges' wives had cooked the supper, and they received a great deal of praise for it. The rectangular brownies thought it was a wonderful to be waited on. And the round brownies enjoyed popping up and getting everything, for then they thought they appreciated the good things to eat still more. And they all hoped the snow would melt some more so that they could have another party the next night and wear their new rubber boots. All right. We have the next story and we're moving. Let's see. Who is the next person to comment? Let me see if I can see it. Let me see. Okay. I had Tamor. I had Sadie. I had Edward. I got them. Let me go up higher. I did Snowball. I had done Patrick. All right. I'm going to do this one for my doodle bug. And she knows who she is. So let me get my fairy jar and a little sip. All right. The lovely. All right. The Fairy Queen Doodlebug's lovely Valentine party. Ooh, my computer's getting hot. It was Valentine Eve in Fairyland, and all the fairies were dancing around dressed in lovely, flimsy red frocks. They carried little red wands from which dangled red hearts, and on their heads they wore little red crowns with bright spangles. Ooh, sounds beautiful. On the tree were big strings of red hearts, which went from tree to tree. Over the grass, they had spread a big red rug, upon which some of the fairies were dancing. Even every fairy had made a valentine for the Fairy Queen Doodlebug, and they were all scattered about the Queen's throne, which she also decorated with red hearts. The Fairy Queen Doodlebug had not yet arrived, as she was going to give them a surprise before they had heard a tinkling of bells and riding in a bright red coach drawn by 100 lizards appeared the Fairy Queen Doodlebug. She was dressed in an exquisite red trailing gown, and in her hair she had a wreath of geranium blossoms. 2 red birds acted as her coachman and a footman to help her alight from the coach. "Come and see your valentines, Fairy Queen Doodlebug," they shouted after they recovered from the excitement of the Queen's new coach. Her coachman and the footman and the 100 lizards stood by the coach watching everything. So the Fairy Queen opened countless little red envelopes in which were lovely valentines that the fairies had made. The Fairy Queen Doodlebug was delighted and thanked the little fairies again and again. And then she said, "When I wave my wand, from all the trees around will fall valentines, so that each little fairy will have one." So with a flourish of her wand, all the trees began to tremble and then wave around as if a storm was coming. But in a second, down dropped little red heart-shaped boxes. Each fairy scampered about wildly to get a valentine. None of them could open the valentine until the Fairy Queen Doodlebug said so, as they all had magic locks. At last, every fairy had one, and the fairy queen waved her wand. Open lids, open valentines, at which every little red heart-shaped box popped open, and out sprang it from each a little red coral necklace. From each necklace hung a glittering heart-shaped charm on which was written, "To my Valentine, from the Fairy Queen, Doodlebug, February 14th. How wonderful, said Evelyn. The fairies must have been delighted. And then they all had the most marvelous supper on a long table decorated with red bonbons and lighted with red lanterns. And the fairies said it was the loveliest Valentine party they had ever had. Oh, all right. Somebody say something in the chat so I can use your name next. Let's see. I have one. Snowball, you still here? You want to go again? Thank you all for coming in. If you want me to put your name in a story, just drop your name. Just say, put an emoji. All right, use my name. Love it. I'll be happy to use my name. Paige's Trip with the Moon. Let me start that over. I was so excited to use my name. Paige's Trip with the Man in the Moon. There was once, said Daddy, a little girl named Paige who had always longed to see the man in the moon. Every night when there was a full moon, she would sit at her window and look at the funny, jolly face of the old man until she became so sleepy she would have to go to bed. One night she sat watching so long that she soon fell sound asleep by the window. It was not long before she saw the strangest thing. The moon seemed to be growing larger and larger, and soon it was back of the trees near her window. She could see quite plainly the jolly old face of her beloved man in the moon, looking jollier and rounder than ever. The old man grinned from ear to ear at Paige, and in a moment or two he spoke. Well, Paige, here I am. Now how do you like me? He spoke, he chuckled and laughed. Oh, I think you're wonderful, said Paige with wild enthusiasm and joy. Wonder if her mama knew she was talking to some man in the moon. Just saying. So, you think I'm wonderful, do you? Ha ha. Well, that's a joke. But there certainly isn't anyone else just like me. That's true. Enough. So maybe I'm wonderful because I'm different. What about that? Oh no, said Paige. You're wonderful because you're so round and jolly, and because you're always laughing and seem to have a good time. At that, the old man in the moon laughed some more and said, well, you're a funny little girl too. All folks don't think it's such a compliment to be around, but I do. It's the way I am, you see, and it's best to be satisfied with the way you are, isn't it? If you really like me, then I'll take you off in my chariot of mist to visit the stars, and you'll call on all of the bright queens of the stars who sparkle so you can see them from down on the earth. So off went Paige with the man on the moon for the most glorious trip They visited all the stars and saw the bright fairy queens who lived in them and all the little elves and brownies. And then the man in the moon showed Paige where in the sky he stayed and how he moved every week or so that all the little boys and girls in the world could see a full moon every month. And Paige could see down below all the wee little houses. They looked so small from where Paige was, and the earth too, which looked very funny and small. Too far from up in the moon, Paige felt a little afraid at first that she'd fall. But as she'd never heard of the man in the moon having tumbled to earth, she felt comforted. Alas, all too soon the journey had come to an end, for Paige heard the distant sound of the breakfast bell. As she yawned, she realized she'd been asleep all night by the window. But, oh, what a glorious sleep it had been. Oh, and they give a beautiful picture. So, let's see. We have time for one more story tonight. All right. The Witch and the Cedar Chest. I'm going to tell you tonight, said Daddy, a story about a little girl named Gretchen. She lived way off in Germany. She was very pretty, with yellow hair and big blue eyes. She was quite round, too, and had a very jolly nature and laughed a great deal. Gretchen's mother and Daddy had both left this earth when she was very young. Gotta watch those words sometimes, yeah? So Gretchen lived with her grandmother and grandfather. She was very happy and had lots of little friends to play with all of the time. In the evenings, before she went to bed, her granddaddy always told her lovely fairy stories. And when she went to bed, she dreamed she was with the fairies, playing games with them and dancing about as fairies do. In the attic of her home were a great many strange and quaint old things. But the thing which seemed to hold more mystery than anything else was the old cedar chest covered with horsehair. Gretchen never dared look in the chest. For some reason, she couldn't understand herself, though she often wondered what was really inside. One night, after Granddaddy had been telling her one of his wonderful stories and her grandmother had tucked her in her soft white bed, Gretchen still felt very wide awake. But before long, she fell asleep and a strange dream came to her. She dreamed she was up in the attic looking at everything in turn, but more than anything else, she was gazing at the old cedar chest and wondering what could be within. And as she was looking, the lid opened, and out stepped a funny old woman with a wrinkled face. She wore a black shawl over her shoulders and a great big pointed hat on her head. Gretchen was sure she was a witch, but she spoke in a very soft, clear voice, not at all gruff, as Gretchen imagined she would speak. Little Gretchen, I have known you were always very curious to learn what was in the cedar chest. I live in it, and I have for years and years, for I am very, very old, as you can see. But my voice does not sound old because I am very happy, and so it does not get the chance to grow old. When you're asleep, I come out of my chest and I go to parties the fairy gives. Tonight, I came to tell you that you must never be afraid of the old cedar chest, but you must never look inside. If you did, my voice would change into the voice of an old woman. Too, that would make me very sad. So Gretchen promised, and the next day when she looked at the chest, it did not frighten her, but she kept her promise, and she did not try to open the top, for she knew that would spoil the witch's greatest happiness. Her voice, which was not old like her wrinkled face. That was a nice one. All right, guys, so we are going to stop right there for tonight. We have a couple more minutes we can spend together. I want to keep these nighttime bedtime stories right at about the hour mark. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments section how you're doing tonight, what you're feeling. Thank you. So I'm going to be reading on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Come back. I had put the time at 7:30. I don't know. I know later is better for most people, but I kind of go to bed early because, like I do on my other channel, I got to look good for my new granny cam over on the other channel. But anyway, those are the stories. That's what I'm doing. Thank you all so much for being here. If you haven't, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you'd like, come on over to the membership where we're going to start doing some member-only lives. And that's what we have going on. With that being said, I wish you all a very nutty night. And just, yeah, that wasn't what I was going to say, but I forgot what I was going to say. So with that being said, everyone have a fabulously nutty night, and I will see you tomorrow. Look for my midday meditations. They come on about 12 or 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, and it's just an hour or two of relaxing little ASMR. And every Thursday, I publish a new ASMR. In those ASMR, there are no talking, and it's just sound or sound and music. So be sure you go check out some of those videos. Let me know what you think, and turn your notifications on so you're sure to catch a live. Good night, guys. Thank you for being with me. Let me try it again.